Welcome to the 7th part of Project Dracunalysис, and there's a storm going on right now as I record this suitably because this is the chapter where the storm happens. So without further ado, let's take a look at it. We'll get the old pointer ready. There we go. So this is interesting. Chapter 7, cutting from the Daily Graph, 8th of August. So it's a local newspaper in Whitby. So remember, the novel is an epistolary novel. We've got Stoker drawing on different genres, different forms of communication. We've had journals, diaries, letters, telegrams, voice recordings transcribed or transliterated and transcribed. And we've got this now, which is from a newspaper. Now, intriguingly, it's pasted in Mina Murray's journal from a correspondent. Who is the mysterious journalist? It might be Mina. We'll see some evidence of this as we have a look at it. It might not be, but it could be. So we knew the storm was coming at the end of the last chapter, and we've got one greatest and suddenest storms on record has just been experienced here, with results both strange and unique. So adding to the mystery, it's an exceptionally unusual, powerful storm. Then we've got a bit of local references here to the area around Whitby, actual places, proper nouns, adds to the realism, and it helps to frame this as a real newspaper type article. Again, lots of local detail here as well. I'm not going to go through everything there. Now notice here, the day was unusually fine till the afternoon when some of the gossips who frequent the East Cliff churchyard and from that commanding eminence watch the wide sweep of sea visible to the north and east. That's Mr. Swales and his mates, isn't it? That's Mr. Swales and his fellow old men. So that looks to be a hint that this would be Mina, because she said she wanted to be or had an interest in being a lady journalist, and it seems here that she's realising her dream, albeit as an independent journalist, freelancer effectively. Never says it out loud, but have a look, you'll see some more examples here. So a sudden show of mare's tails high in the sky to the northwest. So that's sort of local seafarer kind of knowledge of watching the sky and knowing what the weather's going to be like from looking at the shape of the clouds. So that old wisdom that we talked about last time. And who could this be? The Coast Guard on duty at once made report on one old fisherman who for more than half a century has kept watch on weather signs on the East Cliff, foretold in an emphatic manner the coming of a sudden storm. That's Mr. Swales, isn't it? It's got to be Mr. Swales. Who would know that? It's Mina. It could be somebody else, but it's more interesting if it's Mina. It's a great one for crossing boundaries as well, because you've got Stoker, who's creating a female character here who's got some agency, some independence. She's pioneering, really, because she's an early female journalist, in an era dominated by men as well, and in a field dominated by men. Notice this, didn't really notice this before, but before the sun dipped below, the black mass of Kettleness standing boldly athwart the western sky. Well, that's a place in the distance, isn't it? But then I noticed, black mass, connotations of that as familiar collocation, that's got connotations of like Satanism and dark rituals. It doesn't actually, it means mass as in the sense of a big shape. But isn't that interesting? I think you can get some ideas from that. I think that would work. I just accidentally paused it then, but I think it's still working. Then we have doubtless some of the sketches of the prelude, The Great Storm Will Grace the RA, and this is Royal Academy and Royal Institute walls in May next. So some painters have captured the severity of this storm as well. Then we have reference to the foreign ship that we saw last week as well. Again, this is obviously dramatic irony here because we know this is the one with Dracula on it. This quotation is interesting too because it's a reference to The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, which is a famous poem by Samuel Taylor Coleridge, and that features the undead. It's got death and the undead in it, so it's obviously a deliberate thing. It's a basically like a ghost ship story, really. And ironically, that is what we've effectively got here. The undead on a ship coming in and then all the crew dying, or most of the crew dying. No, it is all of the crew in this actually die, don't they? In the poem, one of the crew doesn't actually die, but that's what I was thinking of. Then we have barking of a dog, so there's that kind of preternatural ability of animals to sense danger before it actually occurs, and again, that is a gothic horror trope, and it's foreshadowing the danger of Dracula arriving, and also the storm itself. Then, without warning, the tempest broke. Dracula does actually have weather control powers as well, so whether it's just because he's here and he's brought doom with him and the storm's created, or Dracula's created the storm deliberately to cover his entrance and make it easier for him to get ashore, that's possible as well. I think that's probably more fun and interesting to think that, isn't it? With a rapidity which at the time seemed incredible and even afterwards impossible to realise, the whole aspect of nature at once became convulsed. Notice how that sentence is structured. You've got the dependent clause has been put at the front, being foregrounded, which is a typical feature of journalistic writing. And we've got a simile here. The wind roared like thunder and blew with such force that it was with difficulty that even strong men kept their feet. So again, the intensity and threat being emphasised at the extent of this storm. We've got lots of really interesting language choices from Stoker here, like white wet clouds. So we've got approximate sound, which is semi-vowel sounds, so these W sounds. White wet clouds which swept by in ghostly fashion. So lexical choices, and this an adjective. So very gothic and evocative, like dank and damp, cold, pathetic fallacy over here because of the weather, because of the threatening situation. It needed but little effort of imagination to think the spirits of those lost at sea were touching their living brethren with the clammy hands of death. So Stoker is deliberately evoking the supernatural quality of the sea and the mystery and the sense of danger and the gothic horror here. Then we have metaphor of the footsteps of the storm. Then we have a reference to the schooner, which we've mentioned before. Dramatic irony here, she must fetch up somewhere if it was only in hell. Again, this is the ship tracking Dracula, who is an agent of evil. And we have the ship coming in to the harbour, but it effectively crashes on its way in and it comes aground. Swept the strange schooner before the blast as it's being pushed in along the storm. And then the most gothic element is lashed to the helm, so that's the wheel of the ship, was a corpse with drooping head which swung horribly to and fro at each motion of the ship. No other form could be seen on deck at all. A great awe came on all as they realised that the ship, as if by a miracle, had found the harbour unsteered, saved by the hand of a dead man. What's happened, the captain has lashed himself to the wheel as a desperate attempt to keep the ship on track, and he's obviously died in the process. Then the ship, there was of course a considerable concussion as the vessel drove up on the sand heap, so it comes aground. Every spar rope and stay was strained and some of the top hammer came crashing down, so it effectively wrecks. But strange of all, the very instant the shore was touched, an immense dog sprang up on deck from below as if shot up by the concussion and running forward jumped from the bow on the sand. So we have Dracula taking, it says dog, but I think it means wolf, because the news report would be rationalising everything and it wouldn't expect there to be a wolf on the ship. So it's more likely that I think it's a wolf rather than dog. But it's ambiguous, but it's definitely Dracula transformed, isn't it? It's got to be. It's too weird otherwise. Making straight for the steep cliff where the churchyard hangs over the laneway to the east pier so steeply that some of the flat tombstones, thrusteins or through stones as they call them in Whitby vernacular, actually project over where the sustaining cliff has fallen away. And this is why I think Dracula's gone to Whitby, because it's easier for him to access the holy ground which he can desecrate so he can recharge his vampiric batteries, metaphorically speaking. The Coast Guard goes on, that's the same one that Mina had talked to earlier on, which is again maybe less strong evidence to think that it's Mina here as well, but it's CB. They go on the ship, and then by the courtesy of the chief boatman, I was, as your correspondent, permitted to climb on deck and was one of the small group who saw the dead seaman whilst actually lashed to the wheel. And we have Mina as a journalist, privileged position she's gone on. So it seems to again be her. You could argue that maybe it's evidence that it's actually not Mina, because you could say, well, surely there would have been some reference to her gender or something like that. Maybe, I don't know. But it's not impossible, but I think it's still meant to be Mina. Then we have more Gothic horror. Between the inner hand and the wood was a crucifix, the set of beads on it, which was fastened being around both wrists and wheel, and all kept fast by the binding cords. So again, we've got this supernatural versus the rational. We've got the faith versus evil and everything as well, and the power of faith. And again, we've got the iconography and artifacts associated with the sailors' religion. It would be, implication appears to be Catholicism again as well. Maybe that's what kept Dracula away long enough for him to steer the ship into safety as well. So gruesomely, the cords with which he was tied had cut the flesh to the bone. So again, a little horror there as well. The Coast Guard said the man must have tied up his own hands, fastening the knot with his teeth. I like the way that Stoker goes to pains to make sure that there's no loose ends. So how did he tie himself to the wheel? Yeah, he said he must have used his teeth. So there we go. The Casabianca reference down here at the bottom, I can't get it to point properly. There you go. The Casabianca, that's reference to a famous poem that would have been very much part of the public consciousness in Stoker's time. So they'd all get the reference as a cultural reference to a poem about a young sailor who sacrifices his life to save the crew and save the ship. Then we have the next page, we have the actual ship. We find out that it's called the Demeter as well, and she's a goddess. She's married to Zeus, which is also his sister. So I wonder if Stoker is deliberately making some of the sort of incestuous links to the Brides of Dracula that we saw earlier on in the novel. Maybe it's a bit of a push, possibly, but it's the best I've got. Then a good deal of interest was abroad concerning the dog which landed when the ship struck, and more than a few of the members of the SPCA, that's the predecessor to the RSPCA, which is very strong in Whitby, have tried to befriend the animal. Here, doggy, doggy, row! So, yeah, but it's actually, again, ironic because it's Dracula. And then the article here, or the writer of the article, again, assuming it's Mina, just say the writer of the article, doesn't put two and two together here. Early this morning, a large dog, a half-breed mastiff belonging to a coal merchant close to Tate Hill Pier, was found dead in the roadway opposite to its master's yard. It had been fighting and manifestly had had a savage opponent, for its throat was torn away and its belly was slit open as if with a savage claw. Well, this was obviously Dracula, presumably in his wolf form. Then we have, over the page, where are we going to go next? We've got, it almost seems as though the captain had been seized with some kind of mania before he had got well into blue water, and that this had developed persistently throughout the voyage. So they're assuming some kind of madness has struck the captain. And they've got the log. So the ship's log, they keep records of the ship. It's part of the job of the captain. You have the captain's log, keep records of anything, and actually other members of the crew keep logs as well. So if anything goes wrong, you've got, it's like the equivalent of black boxes in aircraft. So you've got a completely different style here. So included in the news article, Stoker is now adopting a different mode, a different genre of writing, a different style. And in this case, it's now become a ship's log. And notice there's lots, it's very economic in its phrasing. So there's a term for this, linguistic economy. So in real life, a captain, very busy, they'd write down things quickly. And you can't just say quickly, we can talk about the language more. There's lots of elision, so lots of words have been elided, E-L-I-D-E-D. Lots of words are left out. You'll notice that pronouns are left out. On 11th of July, at dawn entered Bosphorus, and not we entered Bosphorus. You don't need to write full sentences for a log of this nature. It needs to make sense. So you notice as well, like, look at the minor sentences here. It's very efficiently written, isn't it? It's obviously as well also a translation from Russian as well, as Stoker makes that clear up here as well. There's lots of rising tension because about the crew being scared. The captain's worried about or anxious about the crew. There was only told them there was something and crossed themselves. This is circumlocution, which means talking around something. And it's another great way of building up suspense. Mate reported in the morning, so that's obviously like first mate, or the second in command, that one of the crew, Petrovsky, was missing. So there's a mystery here. Again, the crew can't rationalise it. We've got Stoker bringing the supernatural world up against the very practical real world, and that's shown by the fact that we've got this very realistic ship's log, but there's like a clash of different worlds here, aren't there, really, in many ways? That there was something aboard. I didn't highlight that bit for some reason, but again, the idea of circumlocution, he doesn't know exactly what it is. We know it's Dracula, or there's dramatic irony, the readers do. Then another man comes into his cabin. It was an awestruck way confided to me that he thought there was a strange man aboard the ship. So more dramatic irony. When he saw a tall, thin man who was not like any of the crew come up the companionway and go along the deck forward and disappear. So more dramatic irony there. This is ironic because at the end of this bit, past Gibraltar and through the Straits, all well. See, Gibraltar spelt incorrectly. I wonder if that's deliberate. 24th of July, 22nd of July. It seems like everything's okay. Never noticed that before. There seems some doom over this ship, so it goes very... Okay, 2 days later. Ironically, because also we know what happens because we've read what's... This is actually before what we've just read in the news report. 4 days in hell, knocking about in some sort of maelstrom in the wind of a tempest. No sleep for anyone, men all worn out. So ironically, 4 days in hell. They've got Dracula on board. Another tragedy. A single watch tonight. His crew too tired to double. When morning watch came on deck, could find no one except steersman. Raised outcry and all came on deck. Mate and I agreed to go armed henceforth and wait for any sign of cause. So all of this building up suspense. The crew are being picked off. Only self and mate and 2 hands left to work ship. Men are beyond fear, working stolidly and patiently, with minds made up to worst. Then we have, and only God can guide us in the fog, which seems to move with us, and God seems to have deserted us. So more kind of religious referencing. It seems to be, again, Dracula has the power to control the weather, so the fog's taking them along as well. Dracula is maybe guiding the storm to push the ship along, I don't know, as well, and also he can feed on the crew. Could all be part of the same plan, really. He went to relieve the man at the wheel, and I found no one there. Then, so again, it's classic horror movie stuff, really. It's before horror movies existed. If you think about, well, lots of horror films. The one I'm thinking of is Alien, which is really a science fiction film, but actually it's more of a horror film. If you know that film, the first one, the original one, and the crew in that are being picked off one by one, and they don't know what the creature is. It's really the DNA of all that kind of genre of the horror. The thing where there's a house, or in the case of Alien, a spaceship or whatever. It's here. The DNA of it is in here, isn't it? And the crew are being picked off one by one. Even Scooby-Doo. So, and yes, thanks, Scoob. Then we have more kind of horror. Yeah, save me there at the bottom. You'd better come too, Captain, before it's too late. He is there. I know the secret now. Get more circumlocution. They don't know exactly who it is. They're not naming it. They just say he is there. This terrible man is on board. God forgive me that the mate was right to jump overboard. So that's what happened. The mate has evacuated the ship himself. It was better to die like a man, to die like a sailor in blue water. No man can object, but I'm captain, I must not leave my ship. So there's that classic heroic archetype of the captain mustn't abandon their post. It dare not touch, and then come wind or foul, I shall save my soul, my honour as a captain. So he's tied himself to the wheel, and then I shall tie that with that which it dare not touch. We've seen it's the beads and the crucifix, so that keeps the captain, gives him a degree of protection. Of course, the verdict was an open one. There is no evidence to adduce, and whether or not the man himself committed the murders, there is now none to say. So poor guy, the captain, he's been a hero and he's just strapped himself in and strapped himself to the wheel. And there's something, well, he might have been killing them off, isn't he? Poor guy. But anyway, his reputation seems to be okay because the public don't, public see him as a hero and he's been given a public funeral. And again, that heroism and selflessness of the captain actually serves as a contrast to the selfishness and the cruelty of Dracula, doesn't it, as well? So he's going to have a funeral there as well. No trace has ever been found of the great dog, of which there is much mourning, and that's all ironic because, again, dramatic irony, because we know that it's Dracula. Then Stoker goes back to Mina Murray's journal. No direct reference of her being, nothing there saying that she'd written this article, but it's a few days later. Lucy was very restless all night, and I too could not sleep. The storm was fearful, and as it boomed loudly among the chimney pots, it made me shudder. So more pathetic fallacy. It's the same storm. It is a very strange thing, this sleepwalking, for as soon as her will is thwarted in any physical way, her intention, if there be any, disappears, and she yields herself almost exactly to the routine of her life. So there's, I think I said before, Victorians were fascinated by sleepwalking, and it's another great example of a liminal space between being awake and being asleep. And even though it's something that exists in real life, it's not kind of fully understood, particularly in Victorian times. So again, it works as being a kind of strange boundary between real things and supernatural things. Then there's a reference to worrying about Jonathan Harker. Again, the irony is we know that the villain who had imprisoned him and endangered him is now arriving in Whitby in England. Reference to the funeral of the poor sea captain, up to the churchyard, and then I'm not sure why I highlighted that really, but I know why, because it's a reference to something that was put in the article, and that may indicate that it's Mina writing it as well. It's another subtle hint, isn't it? Then poor Lucy seemed much upset. She was restless and uneasy all the time, and I cannot but think that her dreaming at night is telling on her. She is quite odd in one thing. She would not admit to me that there was any cause for restlessness, or if there be, she would not understand it herself. Well, again, it seems to be she's coming under Dracula's influence as well. There was an additional cause in that poor old Mr. Swales, oh no, was found dead this morning on our seat, his neck being broken. He had evidently, as the doctor said, fallen back in the seat in some sort of fright, for there was a look of fear and horror on his face that the men said made them shudder. Poor dear old man. Perhaps he had seen death with his dying eyes, and that's exactly what he saw, because he's seen Dracula. Then we have a reference to, during the service, the dog would not come to its master, who was on the seat with us, but kept a few yards off, barking and howling. Again, that element of animals can sense things that humans can't perceive. It's going for that, again, that kind of known trope, really. And the dog here, it was in a sort of fury, with its eyes savage and all its hairs bristling out like a cat's tail when puss is on the warpath. Finally, the man too got angry and jumped down and kicked the dog. It's a bit cruel. And then took it by the scruff of the neck and half dragged and threw it on the tombstone on which the seat is fixed. Now, the moment it touched the stone, the poor thing became quiet and fell all into a tremble. It did not try to get away, but crouched down, quivering and cowering, and in such a pitiable state of terror that I tried, though without effect, to comfort it. Is this grave where Dracula is hiding? Probably yes, because remember, some of the tombstones, some of the graveyard is open towards the cliff, isn't it? So Dracula could get up through there, and underneath he wouldn't actually have to dig up the graves. He could crawl in through the sides. So the dog is presumably sensitive to the fact that Dracula is actually under there, and the humans can't detect it. Now it's the same. It's near where Mr. Swales would have been sitting, so he's probably seen Dracula get out of the grave or something, isn't he? And that's what's terrified him and Dracula's killed him. So, yeah, that's it for this chapter. I hope you found it useful. Like, comment, subscribe, visit the merch store if you so wish. There's no obligation. But thank you for listening. Until next time. Goodbye. Stay safe. For this one.